Well, on November 10th of 1975, the Emmett Fitzgerald disappeared from radar during a terrible storm.
The sinking of the USS Indianapolis was a nightmare. In 12 minutes, it was gone. For the survivors, an even worse ordeal began. For the captain, a lifetime of shame followed, ending in tragedy. For decades, the ship's grave was lost, holding its secrets. But after its discovery, a high-tech AI was used to create a perfect three-dimensional model of the wreck. This digital ghost was analyzed, and what the AI found in the data has stunned historians. The wreck itself just provided the final piece of evidence to clear its captain's name. How AI rewrote the final chapter. The wreck of the USS Indianapolis is a tomb. It lies in the crushing blackness of the Philippine Sea, over 18,000 feet down. That's more than 3.5 miles, an alien world where sunlight has never touched. When a team led by Paul Allen finally located it in 2017, it was a monumental discovery. For 72 years, the ship was lost, a ghost in the world's largest ocean. The first images sent up by the robotic drone were haunting. An anchor, a gun turret, the ship's nameplate, all perfectly preserved in the freezing cold. It confirmed the final resting place of 1,195 men. At the time, we thought finding the wreck was the end of the story, but it was only the beginning. The thing nobody tells you is that finding a wreck this deep is one thing. Understanding it is a whole different ballgame. The RV Petrel, the research vessel that found it, didn't just take a few snapshots. It spent weeks meticulously scanning the entire site. It used advanced sonar and high-definition cameras on its robotic vehicles to capture thousands of images. This data was used to build a 3D photogrammetry model. That's a complicated term for something amazing. A perfect digital ghost of the entire wreck and its debris field. And this is where the real story begins. In the years since the discovery, this massive data set, terabytes of information, has been fed into advanced artificial intelligence systems. A human eye can look at a photo and see a piece of wreckage, but an AI can look at 50,000 photos at once. It can cross-reference sonar pings with the ship's original blueprints. It can measure the blast fragmentation, the shear lines on the steel, and the exact scatter pattern of the debris. And to put it mildly, what the AI found has stunned experts. It found the truth that the ship's captain took to his grave. For decades, the official story of the Indianapolis was one of human error. The captain, Charles McVeigh III, was court-martialed. He was accused of failing to steer the ship in a zigzag pattern to avoid submarines. He was, in effect, blamed for the loss of his own ship and over 800 men. McVeigh argued he was following orders, that visibility was low, and that zigzagging wouldn't have mattered. He was convicted anyway. It was the only time in American history a captain was court-martialed for losing his ship in an act of war. But now, the AI has become the captain's final witness. The analysis of the wreck's location is the first bombshell. The ship was found exactly where Captain McVeigh testified it had been. This fact alone debunks old theories that he was off course or lost. The AI analysis of the debris field, mapping where every piece of the ship landed, showed something even more crucial. It confirmed the ship was struck by 2 torpedoes from the Japanese submarine I-58. The first one hit the bow, which was bad enough, but the AI modeled the second torpedo's impact. It struck mid-ship, right near a fuel bunker and a powder magazine. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. The AI analysis of the torn steel shows a level of violence that is almost unimaginable. The ship was, quite literally, blown in half. It wasn't a slow foundering. It was an execution. The ship sank in just 12 minutes. The AI simulation based on the real-world damage proved that no amount of zigzagging, no damage control, and no captain in the world could have saved the Indianapolis. The AI confirmed in cold, hard data what the survivors had known all along. The captain was innocent. The blame laid at his feet for over 50 years was a lie, and the proof had been waiting 3.5 miles down. But that vindication was needed for a reason. The story of why the captain was blamed is even darker than the sinking itself. More than just a cruiser, before it was a tomb, the USS Indianapolis was the pride of the fleet. This wasn't just some random cruiser. This was a flagship. It was fast, powerful, and had a storied history. It had served President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It had fought in major battles across the Pacific. By 1945, it was a battle-hardened veteran. The crew of nearly 1,200 men were proud to serve on her. They called her the Indy, and they believed she was indestructible. But in July of 1945, the Indy was given a mission so secret, it was kept off the books. What many overlooked at the time was the strange cargo loaded onto the ship in San Francisco. It was a large wooden crate measuring about 15 feet long and a smaller, heavy metal canister. Armed guards watched it being loaded. The crew was told to ask no questions. Captain McVeigh himself was only told that the cargo was vital and that he was to sail to the island of Tinian at maximum speed, alone. There would be no destroyer escort. Escorts were in high demand, and the Navy command figured that a fast ship like the Indy could outrun any threat on its own. This decision was, to put it mildly, a fatal error in judgment. The Indianapolis set a speed record, blazing across the Pacific in just 10 days. The crew, young men mostly between 18 and 21 years old, had no idea what they were carrying. They didn't know that the crate held the components for Little Boy, the atomic bomb. They didn't know the canister held the enriched uranium. They were, in effect, transporting the weapon that would end the Second World War. On July 26, 1945, they delivered the cargo to Tinian. The mission was a perfect success. The bomb was assembled and, just days later, loaded onto the Enola Gay. With its secret mission complete, the Indianapolis was sent to Guam for new orders. There, it was told to sail to Leyte or Leyte in the Philippines to join a battleship group preparing for the invasion of Japan. But here's the kicker: the ship was still deemed low priority. The Navy's routing office in Guam failed to inform Captain McVeigh of a crucial piece of intelligence. Japanese submarines were known to be active on his exact route. They didn't just forget, they made a choice. They believed the risk was acceptable. Even worse, they denied McVeigh's request for a destroyer escort. Once again, he was ordered to sail alone. And this time, he wasn't racing. He was on a standard, steady transit. On July 28th, the Indianapolis left Guam, a lone, high-profile target sailing into a hunting ground. The ship and its 1,195 men had delivered the weapon that would end the war, but in doing so, they had sealed their own fate. They were now considered expendable. The ship would never make it to Leyte. The silence was about to fall. 12 minutes to hell. Just after midnight on July 30th, 1945, the Indianapolis was cruising through a dark, calm sea. Visibility was intermittent. Many of the crew were asleep in their racks, trying to escape the stifling tropical heat below decks. Captain McVeigh, following standard procedure, had given permission to cease the zigzag maneuver as the visibility was poor and he believed the risk was low. He had no idea he was being watched. Miles away, the Japanese submarine I-58, commanded by Mochitsura Hashimoto, or Mochi Tiesurra Hashi Emoto, had surfaced. Hashimoto was a skilled commander, and he couldn't believe his luck. Through his periscope, he saw the silhouette of a large American warship sailing alone with no escort. It was the perfect target. He gave the order to submerge and prepare a torpedo spread. At 14 minutes past midnight, the I-58 fired a fan of 6 torpedoes. Aboard the Indy, a lookout suddenly screamed, "Torpedo off the starboard bow!" But it was too late. The first torpedo struck the ship's bow, ripping a massive hole in the hull. The explosion was devastating, instantly ending the lives of dozens of men in the forward compartments. But the ship was big. It was a heavy cruiser. It could, in theory, survive a single torpedo hit, but Hashimoto had fired 6. Seconds later, a second torpedo slammed into the ship almost directly amidships. This was the shot that the AI scan would later analyze with such precision. It hit right next to the aviation fuel tanks and a powder magazine. The result was a chain reaction, a colossal, blinding explosion that erupted from the center of the ship. The blast traveled up through the decks, wiping out the main communication center and the electrical generators. In an instant, the ship was plunged into total darkness and terrifying silence. The Indianapolis had been fatally wounded. The order was given to abandon ship, but for many, there was no time. The ship was listing badly to starboard, and water was pouring in through the gaping wounds. The AI analysis later confirmed what survivors said. The ship was coming apart. The bow had been almost completely severed, and the ship was sinking fast. Men were trapped below decks, some by fire, others by flooding. Those on the upper decks scrambled in the pitch black, trying to find life rafts and jackets. The Indianapolis rolled completely onto its side. Men were sliding off the hull into the oil-slicked water. Then the stern rose high into the air, and the ship plunged bow first into the depths. From the first torpedo strike to the moment the ship vanished beneath the waves, only 12 minutes had passed. 1,195 men were on board. It's estimated that around 900 of them made it off the ship and into the water. They had survived the sinking. But as they bobbed in the dark, oily water, they had no idea that their true ordeal, one of the most horrifying survival stories in modern history, was just beginning. Ignored and abandoned, the 900 men who survived the 12-minute sinking found themselves in an ocean of pure blackness. They were covered in thick black fuel oil that burned their eyes and skin. Many were badly wounded from the explosions. They clung to anything that floated: potato crates, nets, and a few overcrowded life rafts. They were scattered over miles of ocean. As the sun rose on the first day, the men tried to organize. They gathered in groups, the largest of which was about 300 men. They believed, with absolute certainty, that rescue was coming. After all, a flagship cruiser doesn't just vanish. The Navy would know they hadn't arrived in Leyte. A search would be launched immediately. They just had to hold on. But the Navy didn't know. This is the most shameful part of the Indianapolis story. The routing station in Leyte, that was supposed to be tracking the ship's arrival, did not report it overdue. The message of its departure from Guam, for reasons still debated, was either lost or ignored. In a shocking, catastrophic failure of basic procedure, no one was looking for them. For one day, then two, the men floated under a blazing tropical sun with no food and, most importantly, no fresh water. The sun was relentless. It baked their skin and the salt water poisoned their bodies. Men began to suffer from severe dehydration. They started to hallucinate. They saw phantom islands, enemy submarines, and ships that weren't there. Some, driven mad by thirst, began to drink the salt water. It was a fatal choice. The salt water only accelerated the dehydration, causing their organs to fail. They would become delirious, often swimming away from their groups, convinced they were going home, only to slip beneath the waves. And then, the sharks came. The explosions and the blood in the water had sent out a signal. The first to arrive were oceanic whitetips, an aggressive species known for their curiosity. At first, they were just bumps in the night. Then, as men began to perish from their wounds or dehydration, the sharks began to feed. For 4.5 days, the survivors lived in a constant state of terror. The sharks would circle the groups, often targeting those who were wounded or isolated. Men would be screaming one moment, and then just be gone, pulled under in a swirl of red water. It was a living nightmare. By the third day, the groups had splintered. Men were turning on each other, fighting over life jackets or the last drops of water. By the fourth day, hope was all but gone. Then, on the morning of the fourth day, a miracle happened. A Navy patrol bomber flown by Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn, or W.L. Burr Gwynn, was on a routine anti-submarine patrol. His radio antenna broke and he flew lower to try and fix it. By pure blind luck, he looked down and saw the oil slick. Then he saw the heads. Dozens and dozens of heads bobbing in the water. He couldn't believe his eyes. He dropped a life raft and a radio transmitter and immediately sent a message: many men in water. The rescue was on, but it was too late for most. Of the 900 men who went into the water, only 317 were pulled out alive. Nearly 600 men had perished, taken by the sun, the salt, or the sharks. The Indianapolis had delivered the bomb that ended the war, but the Navy had abandoned its men to the worst fate imaginable. And for the survivors, the nightmare wasn't over. The Navy needed someone to blame, finding a scapegoat. When the 317 survivors were finally pulled from the churning, blood-soaked waters of the Philippine Sea, they were barely human. They were skeletons covered in saltwater sores and fuel oil. They were traumatized, burned, dehydrated, and haunted by the screams of the men who hadn't made it. But instead of being universally treated as the heroes they were, a dark, bureaucratic cloud was already forming over their rescue. The United States Navy was facing an unprecedented public relations disaster. This wasn't just any ship. It was the USS Indianapolis, the flagship of the Fifth Fleet, the very vessel that had just delivered the core components of the atomic bomb. How could it simply vanish? How could the Navy lose a heavy cruiser and its 1,195 souls? And worse, how could it then forget about them? For 4 agonizing days, as hundreds of men were picked off by sharks and exposure, no one even knew they were missing. It was, to put it mildly, the greatest naval blunder of the entire war. The brass needed answers, but more than that, they needed a scapegoat. And they found one. The ship's commander, Captain Charles Butler McVeigh III. In November 1945, just months after the joyous celebrations of VJ Day, the Navy shocked the nation. They announced Captain McVeigh would be court-martialed. The charges were twofold. One, for failing to order his ship to zigzag, a maneuver meant to evade submarines. And 2, for failing to order abandoned ship in a timely manner. The second charge was so transparently absurd, it was almost immediately dropped. The Indianapolis had been torn in half by 2 torpedoes and plunged into the abyss in just 12 minutes. There was no time for formal orders. It was pure, unadulterated chaos. But the first charge, failing to zigzag, stuck. The Navy was determined to prove that McVeigh's personal negligence, not a systemic failure of intelligence and communication, had caused the sinking. The trial was a sham from the start. The prosecution's case was paper thin, and they knew it. McVeigh's orders regarding zigzagging were discretionary, to be followed if visibility and conditions permitted. McVeigh had testified that visibility was poor that night, and he wanted to make port as fast as possible. Furthermore, the Navy itself had failed to inform him that a Japanese submarine was known to be hunting in his exact path. They had sent him into an ambush, so, needing a bombshell, the prosecution did something unprecedented and morally bankrupt. They flew in the commander of the Japanese submarine I-58, Mochitsura Hashimoto, to testify against McVeigh. Imagine the scene. A Japanese officer who had been a mortal enemy just weeks before was now the Navy's star witness against one of its own decorated captains. Hashimoto took the stand and, through a translator, testified that visibility was, in his opinion, good. He then stated that if the Indianapolis had been zigzagging, he might not have been able to line up his shot. This was all the prosecution needed. They conveniently ignored the fact that Hashimoto also stated unequivocally that he had a clear shot and likely could have hit the ship anyway. They ignored McVeigh's testimony that he was following his discretionary orders. They ignored the legion of his own crewmen, the survivors, who revered him and testified to his competence. In December 1945, Captain McVeigh was found guilty of hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. The conviction destroyed him, even though his sentence, a loss of seniority, was later remitted by the Secretary of the Navy. The guilty verdict remained on his record. He was, in the public eye, the man who lost the Indianapolis. He continued his Navy career, but the shadow was inescapable. He received a torrent of hate mail from grieving families who had been led by the Navy to believe he was personally responsible for the loss of their sons. For 23 agonizing years, he lived with this burden. In 1968, at his home in Litchfield, Connecticut, Captain Charles McVeigh III, wearing his Navy uniform and holding a toy sailor given to him by his father, ended his own life. But the story was not over. The surviving crewmen, the Indy survivors, never stopped fighting for their captain. They knew he was innocent. They spent the next 5 decades lobbying Congress, writing letters, and telling their story to anyone who would listen. Their greatest advocate, bizarrely, came in the form of a high school student named Hunter Scott. In 1996, for a history project, Scott began investigating the sinking. He interviewed over 150 survivors and pored over declassified documents, ultimately proving that the Navy knew about the danger and had scapegoated their captain. His project brought national attention to the injustice. Finally, in October 2000, Congress passed a resolution signed by President Bill Clinton that officially exonerated Captain McVeigh. It was a victory, but a bittersweet one. The Navy, for its part, was slow to formally accept it. But then, 17 years later, the RV Petrel found the wreck, and with it, the final, undeniable proof. The ship was found 18,000 feet down, a ghostly tomb on the ocean floor. The analysis of the wreckage, using advanced imaging and AI-driven forensic modeling, confirmed what the survivors, Hunter Scott and history knew all along. The ship was not lost by a man. It was lost by 2 perfectly aimed enemy torpedoes. The AI scans of the catastrophic damage showed the ship was doomed from the moment of impact. The ship itself, speaking from its watery grave, had finally and forever cleared its captain's name. The AI scan gave the Indianapolis its final voice. But was this justice or just a tragic postscript to a life that was needlessly destroyed? Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe for more.